My name is Teresa Kruchek, and I'm the interim chair of the Department of Educational Studies. Educational Studies is comprised of a combination of graduate and undergraduate programs, and the undergraduate programs are focused on secondary education, which includes middle school and high school. So we train people who want to be secondary teachers. All of our faculty who are teaching in our core educational curriculum have been trained as educators themselves. The students who are drawn to the Educational Studies Department and the students who are drawn to secondary education are students who have a high passion and commitment to making the world a better place. It is a challenging profession to pursue in these days and times. There is oftentimes a sense of devaluing education and devaluing educators. So the students we get are those who, in spite of those challenges that are broader challenges in our society right now toward education, they're students who have a commitment to working with young people, to ensuring that the students that they're working with receive a good education and receive an education that's going to enable them to be successful in the world of work once they complete their studies. So here at Ball State, the model of secondary education that we use is one that's a combined effort with the core teaching faculty here in Teachers College and core faculty who are in the various content areas that the students want to specialize in. And so if you are in your courses here, you'll have a combination of the core education faculty that you're working with, and then you'll also be directly working with faculty in your content areas.
How often do you see, a kid maybe talking to another kid? And you probably have seen this when you observe, and even sometimes I'm guilty of this. I have two students talking, and it's like, why aren't they paying attention? Where they may actually be trying to clarify something. And how easy is it to just mistake that as kids not paying attention? What are you thinking, Ashley? Concepts of Secondary Education is our first professional education course for teacher candidates or potential teaching majors. And it introduces them to the history of American education, some of the issues that are occurring within our education system, in addition to classroom observations, clinical experiences. So they're in the classrooms actually seeing things from a teacher's point of view for the first time, as they're beginning to think about how does classroom instruction happen, classroom management. Also, they're introduced to standards, the portfolio process, as they begin to enter into Teachers College the following year. And so it's really an overall introduction. And one of the key things that I emphasize is the development of a cognitive dissonance, beginning to question their own experiences within education, and also how are those experiences affecting them as teachers, and how can they create an inclusive classroom environment for all of their students in the 21st century.
I feel like I'm learning so much more than I would just reading a textbook about theory or like a teaching style. She typically tries to get us as hands-on as possible with anything and everything that has to do with education, which is really nice. Anybody who plans on being a teacher, even if you have the chance to talk to her or any of her students, I feel like we have such a different outlook on education now, because she really has opened up our eyes and our minds, and she really has made us question everything that we've been taught since we were children, like very, very small children. Everything about the education system, our own personal beliefs and morals. She is making us see ourselves like for ourselves for the first time ever, and it's an amazing experience. And I really am happy that I didn't get into the social studies education class that I wanted. This was a happy accident, a very happy accident, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to have this experience. here at Ball State and with Carrie and with my classmates. It's just, you have to really go through it yourself to understand how amazing that class was for me. It's just, I love it. Great.
Some old lady walks up to her and walks up to the baby and said, "Oh, what's her name? Like, blah 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 this. She's so cute." And he's like, the dad was like, "Did you just call my son a girl because he's wearing pink?" And he was like, "Well, it's your fault for dressing him in pink. Everyone's gonna think he's a girl." Like, she got really crappy with him, and she was like, he said, "If I can wear pink, my son can wear pink."
Where you are using that lens to make judgment, and that is part of the culture.
Multicultural education is a course that came into existence in the early 1970s, and it was designed to prepare pre-service teachers to become competent in cross-cultural issues so that they can be able to address cultural diversity in their classroom. And the original focus was on race, ethnicity, and gender, and then subsequently disabilities and sexual orientations and other different forms of diversity have also been added into the curriculum. So the core objectives is to make sure that we are preparing pre-service teachers to become sensitive and culturally competent in dealing with students from diverse backgrounds.
We have a lot of problems with people not thinking critically but not really caring enough, and that's kind of the baseline, is that people get out in teaching and they burn themselves out because they either didn't really want to get into teaching in the first place, or they didn't have the skills to be able to cope with all the kind of stuff that gets thrown at us. I know the Ross Community Center is a really great way for us to have that kind of experience before we're out in the field, because most likely that we won't have kids to this extreme all at once. Some of us will, but I think it's a great experience to kind of understand that kind of pressure intensive and being able to be level-headed, because it's very easy to have kids kind of get at you and you start freaking out, and then you make bad decisions about how to teach them. So I think that's very, very vital for our class, and I think especially talking about diversity with kind of, I mean, I would say right now we're kind of in the peak of just all these kind of different things happening all at once and having so many different people. I think we've always had differences between one another, but we didn't really get to the point of accepting them until kind of recently. And we still have problems accepting people for who they are, but I think it's right now it's so out there that we have to talk about these things. If we don't understand them, then we're not going to be able to help these students that are going through these things. And I think for me, being able to, like I said earlier, discuss with other people about things I'm not familiar with, but also things that I am very familiar with, because my hope is that the people around me have the desire and passion that I do, because I think it's only going to help us get better, and I like trying to basically get everyone on the same page. As much as it's not my role as a student, I think it's kind of my duty to do that, is to kind of check. I mean, we have to check each other, because I think we should be able to openly say, like, no, that's just not, it's not what we need for the students. It's not necessarily we're attacking someone's beliefs. We're just trying to think, right now we're trying to help the student out, and if your beliefs kind of hinder that, that's kind of what we have to see, and we kind of have to put those to the door just to help the kids out. I mean, and that's the hardest thing to do, and kind of this class really helps us understand that we have to do that to progress forward as a profession and for our students.
The Ross Center is a community center on the south side of Muncie. We're on 10th Street, and we work with people of all ages. Our mission is to build community through our programs, services, and activities to create a safe haven for all and spaces for learning, fun, and growth. So historically, I mean, many years ago, much before my time, but through multicultural education, I think there were times when some of the students from multicultural education used to come here to the Ross Center. Then they stopped because we just didn't have, we were in such disrepair, and so they didn't come back until I came in last year, and I know Dr. DeManu. So Dr. DeManu was in his second semester, I believe, last spring, and so I had spoken with him. And I said, well, we're starting up our programs again, and if you'd like to send some of your volunteers over, your students from Edmu 205. And so that's how they started coming. Now, what they do when they come here is that they work with the kids holistically. One of the things that they do, they play with the kids, but they also do one-on-one tutoring with them. They help them with their homework, and then they help them with activities. Create science experiments, help them with their reading, go outside. One thing I always motivate them to do is think outside of, I hate that word, outside the box, but think beyond the boundaries of school. How can you work with the kids on reviving their curiosity outside, playing? How do you learn biology? How do you learn, math on the patio, looking at the sun, and looking at the angles of the sun, playing hopscotch, sitting down under the trees, reading a book. So that's what they do a lot too, That is really the objective of the multicultural education kids to come here.
For me, that experience is kind of just an extension of what I love about the course, and just working with people that are not as privileged as I am, and it makes me feel really purposeful that I can help people that are struggling at a level that I don't think I ever will be at, and it brings me hope that the problems that I have, I can figure out, but it also gives me a way to help other people out, and especially these are kids 10 and under that are either come from broken homes or way below the poverty line, have had some trauma in their past, or even recently, because they're so young. Just trying to help them to look at things differently, maybe be more engaged with school. That's kind of the big purpose of the center with the people that we work with, is to make sure that they're doing their homework and kind of having like an extension beyond school that's kind of helping them out, because really their home life is not beneficial to them. So I think for me, it's just been such a great opportunity to not only look to the future with places that I could do outside of Ball State, because I don't plan on being in the vicinity of Muncie forever, but knowing that I probably will have students in similar boats to them, and I will probably find out the day of when I start teaching them, and I have to try to figure out what I can do for them to not only make them successful, but also happy, because that's the most difficult part about these kids, is that they really have so much baggage that it's hard for them to have positivity because they just don't get it. So I feel really obligated to do it. As much as it's a requirement, it does help me kind of get out there and find somewhere, but if I was able to, I would be there constantly, because I just know that they need that kind of experience.
But what did you do? He came up with a strategy to make this a little bit easier for him.
The class itself is called EdJH 385/EdSec 380, which is basically, it's a two-part class. One focuses on the middle level learner, and the other portion, or the other part of the semester, focuses on the high school level learner. And it is a class that's required for all secondary education majors. Usually they take it their senior year prior to student teaching. And then sometimes we'll have some elementary ed if they're also looking at getting a middle school license. I would say the clinical faculty, or the clinical components. So anytime that they're able to actually get into the high school and middle school classrooms and teach. And what that teaching looks like may look different depending on what classroom you go into, but anything from making intentional observations, not just sitting in the back of the room, but really looking for particular things like in classroom management or instructional strategies, and then also being in front of a class, teaching on their own, co-teaching with cooperating teachers, those types of things. So really the clinical portion of it.
The classroom with Cresta, she's been a little bit more limited this semester. There's only, there was 4 students for EdJH 385 and 3 students for EDSE 380. But she implements a lot of the strategies that she's teaching us about. I feel like it's more of like rubbing minds. Like if I share something like a blog I've come across, she might share it with the other students and then we'll talk about it, or vice versa, you know, like, hey, I came across this, you know, political argument, you know, let's talk about this. What does this mean for us? And so we're talking about those things. And I feel like I get her experience from teaching to go with me as a teacher instead of just, I'm a student and she's telling me what I need to do. Being in the EdJH 385 and EDSE 380 has prepared me for student teaching a lot more. Previously, it would have been that we would just go from here doing methods courses to all of a sudden we're student teaching, and this has allowed us to be in schools working with students at a little more of a low stakes, not, you know, this is it moment for us. And so it's helped me learn a little bit more about what to expect when I'm student teaching, and getting to watch other teachers and observing them and what they're doing and getting involved with them and asking them questions before I'm just thrown into the deep end and told to swim. Right now, the most memorable moment that I had happened to be the day that Cresta was observing me while I was teaching in the middle school, and I was asking students to read out loud, and one student decided that he was going to not only read out loud, but he was going to read all of the punctuation marks that were there as well. So he read 1 period, what is, you know, question, whatever, then he'd say question mark, blank line, and then he'd read the next question. And my initial response was, I'm not gonna feed into his behavior and just let him do his thing and pretend like it's not getting to me. But what the cooperating teacher realized in that moment was other students were then going to follow suit. So when I asked another student to read, this cooperating teacher stood up and said, and if you read the punctuation, you will have to read it over again. And when we talked about it later, and I talked with Cresta about it, it was more like nipping something in the bud in the beginning. Like, yes, we're not supposed to let them know that they're getting to us, but knowing your students well enough to know that this was going to spiral even worse than where it was at the moment. And in that moment, I realized like how important it is to know your students and your classroom, and that classroom management is something that's going to come with experience, and it's not an experience that I have at this moment. With the course, then Cresta kind of coaches me through it, like here's what I saw happening, here's how I see you handled this, and here's how you could do this better. She then takes those moments with my permission. She shared some of the other teacher candidates' moments as well. Here are some situations. How could we handle this differently? And we kind of have real life scenarios. Hey, you had a real student. This was a real moment. How's a different way that this could have been taken care of? And then we kind of plot out, you know, you talk about some of those students you might see in a classroom, like your class clown or the teacher's pet or any variation of things. And now you have students in mind that you can think of, and you'd be like, yeah, I had that one student that was like this. Okay, well, how do you handle that student? So it's not just the mythical stereotype student, how do you handle this individual who's showing traits of being a class clown? And ironically, the guy that was reading punctuation was usually a pretty quiet student. He just chose this day to be a class clown. So how do you normally handle him? You know, like I was definitely not prepared for him to be a little kooky, and the class kind of teaches you more about having a plan in place for all scenarios all the time. Just to have plans, always.
Ball State also has a reputation within their teachers college of producing quality teachers who are ready that first year of teaching to go out and, you know, really kind of tackle the classroom. So I would say the biggest advantage is reputation, and then just knowing that if you can make it through the program, you're going to be ready. Although your first year of teaching is going to be hard no matter what, you're really going to have the skills and the knowledge that you need to succeed your first year of teaching.
Intolerance for same-sex parents in household. So finding attitudes in our broader culture that could bear on the child as far as you've observed. The Social Foundations of Education, otherwise known as EdFund 420, is a course that is concerned with making clear the relevance of social processes to the educational institution and its ideals and its practices. The goal is to help teacher candidates understand the relevance of social factors to their decision making with respect to how they conduct their classroom, but also to how education looks in the 21st century in terms of its delivery, its accountability, its policies, etc., etc. I believe that the 420 allows the teaching major to see his or her practice in a different way. So 420 is really concerned about making that theory to practice connection. So the theories that that concern pedagogy, various kinds, content pedagogy, instructional design, instructional planning, all of those are grand theories, but we have to, of course, implement them in the classroom. And so in the process of implementation, there are multiple factors to consider. And so I think without the social foundations focus or lens, it's easy for the teacher candidate to fall into a technical approach. And this is a sort of formulation that's been talked about by Ziegner and Liston, who discussed the difference between the technical practitioner and the reflective practitioner. So social foundations, I think, is the bridge that makes it possible for the teacher candidate to understand what it means to reflect on his or her practice, and not just to see the classroom as a matter of implementing, standard practices. So we hope to give the teacher candidate the content, the background, the information, the perspective to reflect on their practices in a way that can benefit the student and can advance the K-12 students' learning.
The lessons are not as lecturing as I had first thought. Most classes are very lecture based. It's very, we're a very close-knit group, so we all can, have our opinions and feel comfortable enough to share them. We all kind of go back and forth with sharing our opinions. She'll basically ask us questions relating to our field, and as a teacher, things that we need to consider, challenges we'll face, like I had said, teaching in a democracy, and the politics that are all going around. So it's really comfortable setting. I know what we say in class is going to stay in class. So if we do say something that's a little uncomfortable, because politics and religion and all that can be uncomfortable, we don't normally talk about it. So it's just a very close-knit group. So it's not very lecture-based. We obviously learn a lot about philosophy and different philosophers, and we read articles, but it's comfortable enough to be ourselves and say what we are thinking. In the EdFo class, we all wrote papers about challenges that we would face in a democracy. So those are all on a website now, but we did have a contest within our class to see if you would go to New Orleans, and there was a conference there that we could go and read our papers. So that was really enjoyable. Me and 2 other girls from the class had got the chance to go, so it was a great opportunity to even see the culture there, because the whole point of the class is within your cultural context. So it was really interesting and just a really great experience, and an opportunity that I had been given because of the class, and they had gotten a grant for it, so you know, it was no out-of-pocket money for me. So it was really great.
Educational Foundations 420 for me, it's all about the context of the school you're in, the community you're in. We're learning about like philosophical context, historical context, all of that. It's been really interesting because we've taken like bus tours around Muncie, so we've gotten to see like where our students come from, and I really enjoy that because, you know, you go into a classroom and you make assumptions about like, this is where I think this kid comes from, this is what I think their background might be like, just based on maybe stereotypical stuff or whatever. But it's been really interesting that we actually delve into what their context is. So I think for me, it's just been mostly about learning about the students. Some of the things that I've learned within the class that I've been able to apply towards the classroom that I've been working in, I've learned mostly about like, how do you incorporate the context that you've learned about? Like when we took our bus tours, we learned like, this is where your students come from. This is a historical context of where your students come from. And how do you bring that into the classroom? And it's, you know, we've worked on modifying our lesson plans to make it more contextual for the students. And that's something I feel like I've really enjoyed because it's good practice for, you know, when I'm actually teaching or even when I'm student teaching. This course has really impacted how I think about my teaching in the future. I still feel passionate about being a teacher. I love little kids, that's why I'm early childhood. But we have talked a lot about, like I said, the context of where you are. And it's just really made me think about wherever I go, I need to know the history of the place, where my students come from, and so I can incorporate that into my classroom. And I just feel so much more prepared, like I said, for student teaching. Because this experience, you're in the classroom all day, twice a week. In the other ones, you wouldn't be. So I know like what happens in the morning, what happens, you know, after lunch, what happens during recess, what happens at the end of the day. I know more about like the procedures that you would have to learn when you're student teaching or teaching on your own than, you know, I would have before. So I've really enjoyed that. I just feel much more prepared and much more passionate.
I think the only other thing I would add is that we're very proud of the fact that we're part of Ball State Teachers College. Teachers College is the foundation for the university as a whole, and without Teachers College there would be no Ball State, and we are proud to sort of be the foundation upon which the university was built.